37% of elderly hospital patients meet the clinical threshold for severe loneliness. James Molina didn't know that statistic. He only knew the silence of the fourth-floor West Wing after midnight. The beeping monitors were someone else's concern. His was the chemical smell of disinfectant and the whisper of his mop over linoleum, night after night, room after room, until one night he did something he wasn't paid to do. And a woman behind a private suite wall, who had everything except someone to listen, decided to change everything. James Molina was a 34-year-old night shift janitor at St. Vincent's General, and a single father to a 6-year-old girl named Sophie. His world was a meticulously scheduled orbit of pre-dawn breakfasts, afternoon kindergarten runs, and the silent, fluorescent-lit corridors of the hospital. From 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. he was exhausted, anonymous, and utterly unaware that his simplest, most personal ritual was being heard through a wall. And that the woman listening was one of the wealthiest, most isolated people in the city, who had just run out of reasons to live. The routine was a study in precision, born of necessity. James finished his janitorial shift at St. Vincent's at 6. He would clock out, walk across the parking lot in the thin morning light, and drive his 11-year-old Honda Civic across town to Mrs. Alvarez's home daycare by 6:45. His daughter, Sophie, would be waiting, her backpack already on, clutching a drawing from the day before. He'd drop her at kindergarten by 7:30, then drive back to their one-bedroom apartment to sleep until 2 p.m. He'd be up to pack her lunch for the next day, do the laundry, pay the bills that never seemed to stop. The medical debt from her birth was a ghost that followed them from state to state, and then pick her up from school by 3. Dinner, homework, bath, and then the ritual. At 8:15 sharp, he would tuck her into the bottom bunk of the bed they shared, the one with the galaxy of glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and he would read, not from a phone, from an actual book with pages that smelled like the thrift store, Charlotte's Web asterisk, The Tale of Despero asterisk, James and the Giant Peach asterisk. He did all the voices. For 20 minutes, the world shrank to the circle of light from her dinosaur lamp and the sound of his own voice weaving a world where spiders could write and mice could be brave. At 8:35, he would kiss her forehead, turn out the light, and wait in the dark until her breathing deepened into sleep. Then he would get into his uniform, kiss her once more, and leave for the hospital by 9:15. He had been doing this for 2 years, since they'd moved to the city. He was, in every measurable way, invisible. St. Vincent's General was a city within a city. The first and second floors were chaos, the ER, admissions, the constant triage of human crisis. The third floor was maternity and post-op, a floor of beginnings and fragile recoveries. The fourth floor, where James was assigned, was different. It was the long-term care wing, oncology, palliative care. The rooms here were quieter, the hallways longer, the nights thicker. His supervisor, a weary man named Carl who had worked there for 30 years, gave him the same briefing every night. Clean the staff lounge, the 4 public bathrooms, the hallways, and any vacated patient rooms. Do not enter occupied patient rooms unless specifically called by a nurse. Do not interact with patients. Your job is surfaces, not people. James followed the rules. He moved through the waxed linoleum corridors with his cart, a squeaky-wheeled metal beast stocked with blue cleaner, stacks of brown paper towels, and bags for red bio, yellow chem, and white general waste. He learned the rhythms. The nurse shift change at 11 p.m. brought a burst of chatter that faded by 11:30. From midnight to 3 a.m., the floor entered a deep, medicated silence, punctuated only by the occasional cough or the distant beep of a pump. By 4 a.m., the early risers among the patients would begin to stir, their call buttons lighting up the nurses' station like a sparse constellation. Room 428 was at the end of the West Wing hallway. It was a private suite, marked on his floor plan simply as VIP. He never cleaned it. A day shift specialist team handled it. All he knew was that the door was always closed, and a discreet security camera was mounted above the frame. He would mop the hallway up to that door, then turn back. He'd heard the nurses talk, in the hushed, half-guilty way people gossip about a tragedy wrapped in money. The patient was Elena Vance, 68 years old, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, admission date 3 months ago, prognosis measured in weeks, not months, net worth estimated at $1.2 billion, most of it from a patent for a revolutionary medical adhesive her late husband had developed decades earlier. She had no children. Her only living relative was a nephew in London she reportedly despised. She had a team, a personal doctor on retainer, a night nurse, a lawyer who visited every Tuesday and Friday like clockwork. She was, by all accounts, polite, lucid, and utterly alone. The staff said she spent her days staring at the wall or watching financial news on mute. She received no personal visitors. The flowers that came every Monday from her corporate office were without fail thrown out by the night nurse on Tuesday morning. For James, she was just a closed door at the end of his hall. His focus was on the clock, on the work, on the thought of Sophie asleep in their dark apartment, on the $96.40 he had in his checking account until payday on Friday. His life was a calculation of ounces, of energy, of time, of money. The one surplus he had was the sound he made for his daughter. And on the night of November 7th, that surplus bled through a wall. He had finished mopping the West Wing by 1 a.m. He was restocking his cart from the janitorial closet when his phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Alvarez. Sophie woke up crying. Bad dream. She's okay now, back asleep. Just wanted you to know. His heart, a tired muscle, clenched. He leaned against the cool cinder block wall of the closet, the phone's glow lighting his face. He knew the dream, the one where he didn't come home. He tried to explain his job, but to a 6-year-old, night meant monsters and work meant absence. An impulse, fierce and irrational, took hold. He couldn't call her, he couldn't wake her, but he could do the next closest thing. He walked back to the West Wing, pushing his cart quietly. The hallway was empty, the nurse's station temporarily vacant. He stopped near room 428, not at the door, but at the wall shared with the empty patient room next door, 426, which was marked for terminal cleaning. He took a breath, feeling foolish. Then, in the same low, steady voice he used in the dark of their apartment, he began to speak, not read, recite. He told the story of the brave little mouse, Despero, who falls in love with a princess and is banished to a dungeon full of rats. He poured the voices into the drywall, toward his daughter miles away, hoping somehow the feeling would travel. He spoke for 5 minutes. Then he stopped, the silence rushing back in. He felt better. He went back to work. He did not know that the wall between room 426 and room 428 at St. Vincent's General was not a proper concrete firewall, but a standard interior partition. He did not know that Elena Vance, unable to sleep, her mind racing against the dying of the light, had been lying perfectly still, listening to the hum of the oxygen concentrator. And he did not know that his voice, clear and warm and telling a story about courage, had not traveled toward his daughter, but had instead filtered through 2 layers of drywall and into the private suite of a woman who had not heard a kind voice, unattached to a billable hour in 3 months. The next night, he did it again. It became a pattern, a secret liturgy in the antiseptic dark. Every night after his break around 1 a.m., James would return to the stretch of hallway near room 426. He would lean against the wall, close his eyes, and for 5, sometimes 10 minutes, he would recite a story. He worked his way through Sophie's entire bookshelf, where the wild things are asterisk, the velveteen rabbit asterisk, the giving tree. He wasn't performing for an audience. He was casting a line into the night, a thread of sound connecting him to his sleeping daughter. The act calmed the hum of worry in his own chest. It made the endless mopping and scrubbing feel less like a sentence and more like a passage. He was utterly unaware that on the other side of the wall, a profound and quiet revolution was taking place. Elena Vance had not asked for a story, she had simply received one. That first night the voice had been a shock, a warm human intrusion into her sterile silence. She had lain there, frozen, listening. She followed the tail of the mouse to its end. When the voice stopped, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't just empty, it was expectant. The next night she waited. She dismissed her night nurse early, claiming fatigue. She turned off the television, and she listened. When the voice came again, telling a story about a tree that loved a boy, a single, sharp tear tracked from the corner of her eye into her silver hair. It was the first time she had cried since her diagnosis, and it wasn't from pain. She began to plan her nights around it. She would have her lawyer, a meticulous man named Robert Thorne, visit during the day. She stopped watching the financial news. She started asking the nurses small questions about the hospital staff, careful to keep her tone idle. Who cleans the floors at night? She asked one evening. The nurse, a woman named Gail, shrugged. The janitorial crew, they're contracted, not hospital employees. Are they kind? Elena asked, staring at the wall. Gail gave her a puzzled smile. I suppose, quiet, they do their job. Elena filed the information away. She was a strategist by nature. For 40 years, she had built and defended an empire from boardrooms. Now she applied that same focused intelligence to a single mystery, the voice in the wall. A week into the ritual, James hit a wall of his own. The transmission in his Civic gave a final, shuddering groan on the way to pick up Sophie from school. The repair estimate was $2,000. He didn't have it. He called Mrs. Alvarez, his voice tight with shame, and asked if she could keep Sophie for a few extra hours. He took the bus to the hospital that night, a 90-minute journey involving 2 transfers. He was late. Carl, his supervisor, wrote him up. The write-up meant a $50 deduction from his next check. The math in James's head became a scream. He moved through his duties that night like a ghost, the weight of it all pressing down. When his 1 a.m. break came, he almost didn't go to the wall. What was the point? But the habit was stronger than despair. He stood there, his forehead resting against the cool paint. He didn't recite a story from a book. He told one from memory, his memory. He spoke in a raw whisper about a man teaching his little girl to ride a bike in an empty parking lot, about holding the seat, about letting go, about the breathtaking terror and pride of watching her wobble away from him. He wasn't crafting a narrative. He was confessing a fear. He was afraid of letting go. In room 428, Elena sat propped up in bed, her breathing shallow. The voice tonight was different, strained. The story wasn't about fantasy. It was about love and fear, utterly real. She heard the crack in it. When he finished, the silence felt charged like the air before a storm. She reached for the call button, then stopped. She couldn't summon him. That would break the spell. It would turn this gift into a transaction. Instead, she did something else. She picked up the phone next to her bed, an independent line, and dialed a number from memory. Robert, it's Elena. I need you to do something, discreetly. Robert Thorne, on the other end in his penthouse apartment, was instantly alert. Of course, what do you need? There is a janitor who works the night shift on the 4th floor at St. Vincent's. I want to know who he is, everything about him, but he cannot know under any circumstances. There was a long pause. Elena, may I ask why? No, Robert, you may not, she said, her voice regaining a fragment of its old boardroom steel. Use the investigator you keep on retainer for the acquisition due diligence. I want a report, his name, his family situation, his financial standing, his character. Is he in trouble? Is he a good man? Elena, this is highly unusual. The legal and ethical considerations. I am dying, Robert, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The only thing I have left to consider is my own conscience. Do it. Investigation took 72 hours. Robert Thorne delivered the findings in person, his expression unreadable. He sat in the visitor's chair beside her bed, a thin manila folder on his lap. His name is James Molina, 34 years old, employed by Clean Sweep Contract Services for the last 2 years. He has a 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. Mother is not in the picture. He is a single father. He rents a 1-bedroom apartment in the Carlton Heights complex. His credit is poor. Significant medical debt, likely from the child's birth. His car broke down 3 days ago. He has 1 written-up warning at work for tardiness. Robert paused, adjusting his glasses. The investigator spoke to his daycare provider, his landlord, and from a distance, a teacher at his daughter's school. The consensus is that he is quiet, reliable, devoted to his child, and currently drowning. There are no red flags, no criminal record. He is, for all intents and purposes, exactly what he appears to be, a man working himself into the ground to keep his daughter safe. Elena took the folder. Her hands, thin and mapped with blue veins, did not tremble. She looked at the photograph paper clipped inside. It was grainy, taken from across a parking lot. James Molina was pushing a shopping cart, his head down, a little girl sitting in the cart, laughing. Elena stared at the image for a long time. She saw the weariness in his posture. She saw the joy on the child's face. She closed the folder. Thank you, Robert. What are you going to do? Robert asked, his voice gentle now. Elena looked at the wall. I am going to listen, she said, and then I am going to change my will. Robert Thorne went very still. Elena, you must think this through. You have a nephew. There are charitable foundations you've supported for years. leaving a significant bequest to a hospital employee, particularly one you've never officially met. The estate will be challenged. It will be seen as undue influence or worse. It could destroy him with legal fees before he ever sees a penny. "I am not a fool, Robert," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "I did not get to where I am by being obvious. I am not going to leave him $1 billion. I am going to leave him a key." Meanwhile, James's world was contracting. He borrowed money from his only friend, a co-worker on the day shift, to cover a week of extra daycare while he navigated the bus system. The $50 deduction from his check meant choosing between the electric bill and buying Sophie new shoes for the coming winter. He chose the shoes. He started skipping meals, telling Sophie he'd eaten a big dinner at work. The fatigue became a permanent layer over him, like dust. But the stories at the wall continued. They became his anchor. In telling Sophie's stories, he reminded himself of who he was fighting for. One night, he told the story of the little engine that could asterisk. He poured every ounce of his own dwindling hope into the words, "I think I can, I think I can, I think I can." Elena, listening, made her decision. The next morning, she called Robert back. "I want to draft a codicil, a new, separate clause for the will. It establishes a discretionary trust. The beneficiary is James Molina, but the trust is not funded from the main estate." "Then from what?" Robert asked, bewildered. "From the Vance Family Literary Foundation," she said. The foundation was a small, almost forgotten entity set up by her husband to promote literacy. It had a corpus of about $5 million and had done little but gather dust for a decade. "Reconstitute the board, make me the sole board member, then draft a directive that upon my death, the foundation's entire corpus is to be used to fund a new initiative. Call it the Nightlight Grant. It is a one-time, no-strings-attached financial grant to be awarded to a parent working in non-medical hospital services who demonstrates extraordinary dedication to family and community. The first recipient is to be James Molina." Robert was silent, processing the legal labyrinth. "The foundation is separate from your personal estate. It's a different pot of money. The nephew would have no standing to challenge it if it's done correctly. The award would be private, administered by the foundation's lawyers. It could look like a grant, not an inheritance." "Exactly," Elena said. "He gets the money. He gets his life back. And no one ever needs to know it came from the woman in room 428. The plan was elegant. It was also a ticking clock. Elena's health was declining. The pain was more constant, managed by a drip that left her foggy. She began fighting the medication, insisting on lower doses in the evenings, desperate to stay lucid for the 1 a.m. story. Her doctor warned her. Her nurse protested. She ignored them. The stories were her medicine now. 2 nights after the codicil was signed, James reached his breaking point. The landlord had slid a final notice under his door: pay the back rent in 72 hours or face eviction. He had nowhere to go, no family to call. Sitting in the break room at 3 a.m., staring at the notice under the fluorescent lights, he felt the last of his resolve crumble. He finished his shift in a daze. When he went to the wall for the story, his voice was hollow. He tried to tell "Goodnight Moon***, but he kept losing his place. He ended up just repeating "goodnight" noises everywhere in a flat, broken whisper before he stopped altogether. He slid down the wall and put his head in his hands, silent. In room 428, Elena heard the difference. She heard the story fracture and die. She heard the silence that wasn't peaceful but devastated. She waited 10 minutes, 20. The voice did not return. A cold panic, sharper than any cancer pain, seized her. The thread was snapping. She had the key, but he was about to fall off the map before she could hand it to him. She could not let that happen. The rules had to break. She reached for her call button and pressed it, not for the nurse, but for the one person she could command. The night nurse, Gail, appeared at the door, but Elena shook her head. "Not you. I need you to send for Mr. Thorne. Now tell him it's urgent." Gail hesitated, but the intensity in Elena's eyes was undeniable. She made the call. Robert Thorne arrived at the hospital at 4:17 a.m., his overcoat thrown over pajamas. He stood at the foot of her bed, his face a mask of professional concern. "Elena, what happened?" "He's in trouble, real trouble, the kind that happens before dawn. I heard it in his voice tonight. We are out of time. The grant, the foundation, the paperwork is in motion, but these things take. I don't care about paperwork. Her voice was a rasp, but it cut. I want you to go to his apartment. Today, you will present him with a loan from the foundation, an advance on the grant. Call it an emergency hardship disbursement, $10,000, no interest, repayable upon the grant's formal issuance. Make it legal, but make it fast. Robert stared at her. Elena, I cannot simply appear at a man's doorstep with a suitcase of cash. That is not how charitable foundations operate. That is how organized crime operates. Then figure out how. She was trembling now from effort and pain. He has a little girl. They are about to lose their home. If that happens, he disappears into the system. The grant won't matter. He will be untraceable. Do you understand? This is the one thing I can fix. The only thing, help me fix it. Robert Thorne, who had spent 30 years saying no to reckless impulses, looked at his client and friend and saw not a dying billionaire, but a desperate human being. He let out a long breath. I'll need his address, and I'll need to draft a document. It will take a few hours. Do it, she said, sinking back into the pillows, her energy spent. And Robert, thank you. James Molina did not go home after his shift. He sat on a bench in the hospital courtyard as the sky lightened from black to bruised purple, the eviction notice a sharp rectangle in his back pocket. He had until 5 p.m. He had no plan. The thought of waking Sophie and telling her they had to leave was a physical pain in his chest. When his phone buzzed with an unknown number at 8 a.m., he almost didn't answer. Hello. Mr. Molina, my name is Robert Thorne. I represent the Vance Family Literary Foundation. We'd like to speak with you about a potential grant opportunity. Would you be available to meet this morning? James's first thought was that it was a scam. His second was that it was a cruel joke. I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong person. James Molina, father of Sophie, residing at 427 Elmwood Drive, Apartment B, employee of Clean Sweep Contract Services. The precision of the information was terrifying. Who are you? James asked, his voice low. As I said, I'm an attorney for a private foundation. We have a discretionary program for which you've been anonymously nominated. It's a substantial financial award. I can explain in person. I'm outside your apartment now. James's heart hammered against his ribs. He walked home, his body moving on autopilot. A sleek black sedan was parked in the lot. A man in a crisp suit, looking utterly out of place, leaned against it. He introduced himself, showed identification, and handed James a business card for a prestigious downtown law firm. He then presented a 2-page document. It outlined an emergency interest-free loan of $10,000 from the Vance Family Literary Foundation to be issued immediately, with the understanding it would be converted to a grant upon the fulfillment of standard foundation protocols. The language was dense, but the number was clear. Why? James asked, the paper trembling in his hand. Why me? Who nominated me? The foundation's nomination process is confidential to protect the privacy of the nominators, who are often community members, Robert said, reciting the line he'd rehearsed. The criteria are based on demonstrated dedication to family and community under significant personal hardship. Our research suggests you fit that profile. It felt like a trap, but the trap had an open door, and inside was the exact amount he needed for the back rent, the car repair, and a month's breathing room. He looked at his apartment window, imagined Sophie inside, still asleep. He had no other move. What do I need to do? Sign here. The funds will be wired to your account by noon. There are no other conditions. James signed. At 11:47 a.m., his phone chimed with a bank alert. The balance was real. He paid the landlord at 1 p.m. He called a mechanic at 1:30. He picked up Sophie from school at 3, and for the first time in weeks, he wasn't calculating the cost of the gas it took to get there. He felt like a man who had been drowning and had been pulled onto a raft, but had no idea who had thrown the rope or why. That night, he went to work with a new anxiety buzzing under his skin. The gift was too specific, too timely. It felt connected to the hospital, to the 4th floor. He did his rounds mechanically, his mind racing. When 1 a.m. came, he stood at the wall, but he didn't tell a story. He spoke directly into the drywall, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know who you are or what this is, but thank you. In room 428, Elena Vance heard the 4 words. She pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob of relief. Then she smiled, a real, unguarded smile. She had done it. She had reached through the wall. But walls have 2 sides, and the other side was watching. Carl, the night supervisor, had noticed the black sedan in the employee lot the previous morning. He'd seen the suit. He had a nose for trouble, and trouble, in a hospital, usually smelled like lawyers. He pulled the security logs for the 4th floor West Wing. He saw that James Molina's keycard had been used to access the janitorial closet every night at approximately 1:05 a.m., and that he lingered in the hallway near the VIP suite for an average of 8 minutes. Carl didn't know about the stories. He saw a pattern of loitering near a billionaire's room. He took his concerns to his manager at Clean Sweep, a woman named Denise, whose primary concern was liability. Denise, in turn, sent a politely worded email to St. Vincent's administration, asking if there were any concerns about their employees' conduct near patient room 428. The email landed in the inbox of the hospital's chief operating officer, a man named David Skiff, whose job was to mitigate risk. A billionaire donor, even a reclusive one, was a risk vector of the highest order. The phrase potential interaction between contracted janitorial staff and terminal VIP set off every alarm he had. He ordered a quiet review. Security footage from the hallway, while not having audio, showed James standing by the wall, motionless, night after night. To Skiff, it didn't look like storytelling, it looked like eavesdropping, or worse. The fact that Elena Vance's personal lawyer had been seen meeting with the janitor off-site completed a sinister triangle in his mind. Extortion, undue influence, a predatory employee targeting a vulnerable patient. On Friday, 2 days after the loan, James was called into a small, windowless office in the hospital's administrative wing. David Skiff and a woman from Human Resources were there. So was Carl, who wouldn't meet his eyes. Skiff got straight to the point. "Mr. Molina, we have concerns about your conduct on the 4th floor, specifically prolonged and unauthorized loitering outside a patient's room. Can you explain what you were doing?" James's blood ran cold. I was on my break. I just stand there sometimes to clear my head." Night after night, at the same time, outside the same room, Skiff's tone was ice. "We are also aware of a meeting between you and a legal representative of that patient. Would you care to explain that?" Panic, sharp and metallic, flooded James's mouth. They knew about Robert Thorne. They had connected it. He approached me about a charity thing for single parents. It had nothing to do with the hospital. "A charity," Skiff repeated, skepticism dripping from the word. "Mr. Molina, patient privacy and security are our highest priorities. Your behavior, combined with this external financial contact, presents a significant breach of protocol. Clean Sweep has been notified. Your services are terminated, effective immediately. You will surrender your keycard and vacate the premises." James was fired. He was marched to his locker, watched as he cleared it out, and escorted to the parking lot. The raft he'd been on for 2 days had just been torpedoed. He sat in his newly repaired car, his hands shaking too hard to turn the key. He had no job. The grant, the loan, if it was even real, would now look like a payoff. He was ruined. He didn't go home. He drove to the downtown address on Robert Thorne's business card. He walked into the marble-lined lobby, still in his janitorial scrubs, and demanded to see him. To his surprise, he was shown up. Robert listened, his face growing graver by the second. "This is a problem," he said. "A serious one. They've constructed a narrative." "I didn't do anything wrong," James said, his voice cracking. "I believe you, but perception is everything. If the hospital formally alleges you were attempting to exert influence on a patient, it could not only jeopardize the grant, but it could also bring scrutiny on Mrs. Vance's mental competency at the time she authorized it. That would give her nephew the opening he needs to challenge everything." "What do I do?" James asked, the helplessness crushing him. Robert steepled his fingers. "We fight back, but we need Mrs. Vance's direct, on-record statement. We need her to state, unequivocally, that your presence was known to her, welcome, and that the Foundation's actions were entirely her idea, born of sound mind. It's the only way to cut the legs out from under their theory." "She's dying. Can she even do that?" "She must," Robert said, and you must come with me to see her right now." Back at St. Vincent's, Elena's condition had deteriorated. The pain was winning. She was under heavier sedation. When Robert and James arrived at the door to room 428, the day nurse blocked their way. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne, she's not receiving visitors. Doctor's orders." Robert's voice took on a tone James hadn't heard before. Cold, commanding. "I am her attorney, and this is a matter of urgent legal and personal significance. You will let us pass, or I will have a court order here within the hour, which will be more disruptive to her rest." The nurse wavered, then stepped aside. The room was dim, the air thick with the smell of medicine and mortality. Elena lay small in the bed, an oxygen cannula in her nose, her eyes closed. Robert approached and spoke softly. "Elena, it's Robert. I'm here with James." Her eyes fluttered open. They were clouded with drugs, but they focused slowly on the figure standing behind Robert. She had never seen him, but she knew his shape from the photograph, the slope of his shoulders. A faint light came into her eyes. "You're here," she whispered. James stepped forward, his heart in his throat. "Mrs. Vance, You tell the best stories," she said, her voice a thread of sound. "You saved my life, did you know that?" James shook his head, tears welling. "No, ma'am." "I want to tell you a story now," she said, gathering her strength. She looked at Robert. "Get a recorder, get a witness, a nurse, a doctor. I am of sound mind. I want it on record." Robert moved swiftly. He summoned the head nurse and Elena's attending physician. A digital recorder was placed on the bedside table. With everyone gathered, Elena Vance, in a voice that grew stronger with each word, told her story. She spoke of the silence, of the voice through the wall, of the characters that kept her company in the dark. She spoke of her investigation, her decision to use her foundation to help him, of her specific instruction to Robert to offer the loan. She stated clearly that James Molina had never solicited anything, had never even been aware of her existence until this moment. "He gave me a reason to live long enough to do one last good thing," she said, her gaze finding James. "That is not a crime, that is a gift, and I am giving one back." The recording lasted 7 minutes. It was a full, lucid, and devastating testimony. Robert had copies made immediately. One was delivered to David Skiff's office with a covering letter from his firm, suggesting that any further action against Mr. Molina would be met with a very public lawsuit for wrongful termination and defamation. The hospital, faced with the undeniable voice of their most famous patient, backed down. They reinstated James's contract with Clean Sweep, though he was reassigned to the first floor. It was a retreat, not an apology. For James, the victory was hollow. He had met the source of the voice and she was leaving. He visited her every day after his shift in the early morning hours. He didn't tell stories from books. He told her about Sophie, about her first lost tooth, her drawing of a 3-legged dog, her theory that clouds were the ghosts of dinosaurs. Elena listened, her hand curled around his, a fragile bird in his calloused palm. On the 5th visit, she was barely conscious. She squeezed his hand once weakly. "Take care of your girl," she whispered, "and keep telling stories." She died 2 hours later, just as the sun was coming up. The official will was read a week later in Robert Thorne's office. The bulk of the estate, over $1 billion, went to various medical research charities and a trust for her nephew. It was headline news. Buried in the financial appendices, a single line noted the dissolution of the Vance Family Literary Foundation and the distribution of its remaining assets to fulfill its final initiative. No names were mentioned. No one in the media noticed. A month after the funeral, James received a formal letter from a trust administrator. The Nightlight grant had been fully processed. The amount was $4,800,000 and change. It was his, tax-free, no strings. He stood in his kitchen, the letter in his hand, and for a full 10 minutes he couldn't move. The number was so large it was abstract. It meant no more debt. It meant a house with a yard. It meant college for Sophie. It meant time. He slid down the cabinet to the floor and cried, not from sadness, but from the sheer, terrifying weight of a future that was now wide open. The first thing James did was nothing. He sat on the floor of his kitchen for a long time. Then he got up, made Sophie's lunch for school, and drove her there like it was any other day. He didn't tell her. The number was too big, too abstract. It felt like holding a live wire, powerful and dangerous. He met with Robert Thorne and a financial advisor the trust had recommended. They set up accounts, talked about annuities and index funds and tax shelters. The words washed over him. All he heard was secure and your daughter's future. He gave them one instruction: I want to pay back the $10,000 loan first, the advance. Robert had smiled, a rare, genuine expression. Consider it done. He didn't quit his job immediately. He worked his new shift on the first floor for 2 more weeks. He needed the rhythm, the familiarity, but the fear was gone. The crushing weight of each hour had lifted. He could look at the mop bucket and not see a life sentence. One Friday he finished his shift, clocked out, and went to see Carl in the supervisor's office. He didn't give notice. He simply said, "Today's my last day. Thank you for the work." Carl, surprised, just nodded. James cleaned out his locker for the second and final time, leaving behind no trace. He bought a house, not a mansion, a 3-bedroom craftsman in a quiet neighborhood with a big backyard and a tree perfect for a swing. The closing process was a blur of signatures. When he got the keys, he took Sophie to see it. He didn't tell her it was theirs. He said a friend was letting them visit. He watched her run from room to room, claiming spaces. This could be my room. This could be your room. This could be the library room. When he finally told her, her face went still with a seriousness he'd never seen. "We live here forever?" "Yes, Mija, forever." She burst into tears, then laughter, then dragged him by the hand to plan where every stuffed animal would go. He paid off every cent of debt. The medical bills from her birth vanished with a few wire transfers. He established a college fund so large it would cover not just tuition, but study abroad, books, an apartment, whatever she wanted. He put money aside for Mrs. Alvarez anonymously to help her expand her daycare. He bought a reliable, unremarkable car. He did not buy a Rolex or a boat. The money was not for a new life. It was armor for the life he already had. And then he stopped. He had secured their world. The pressure that had defined his adulthood for 6 years was gone. In its place was a vast, quiet space. And in that space he found grief. He missed the woman in room 428. He missed her more profoundly than he expected. He had known her for a handful of days at the end, and yet she had seen him, the real him, in a way no one else had since his wife had died. He visited her grave in the city's historic cemetery. It was a simple, elegant stone. Elena Constance Vance, beloved friend. He brought Sophie. She placed a dandelion she'd picked from the side of the path on the granite. "She liked your stories, right, Daddy?" "Yeah, honey, she did." He felt a responsibility to the gift. It wasn't guilt. It was a debt of intention. Elena hadn't given him money to be rich. She'd given it to him to be free, to be a present father, to tell stories. One afternoon, while Sophie was at a friend's house, he was in his new garage, which was empty except for boxes, and an idea landed with the force of a physical thing. It was so obvious it took his breath away. He called Robert Thorne. "The foundation, the Vance Family Literary Foundation, is it completely dissolved? The assets were dispersed to you as the grant recipient. The entity is inactive. Why? What would it take to restart it? A new one, not with my money, with some of it. I want to fund it. I want to call it the Nightlight Foundation for real this time, and I want to run it." There was a long pause. "James, running a foundation is a full-time job. It's administration, grant review, legal compliance." "I know," James said, looking out at his backyard. "But I also know what it's looking for. I know the person standing in the dark, needing a story. I can find them." With Robert's guidance, he did it. He endowed the new Nightlight Foundation with $2 million. Its mission was singular: to provide no-strings-attached financial stability grants to single parents working in essential, but often invisible, night shift jobs: hospital orderlies, security guards, cleaners, convenience store clerks. The nomination process was modeled on what Elena had done. Relied on anonymous testimonials from co-workers, teachers, neighbors about parents who were quietly holding the world together for their kids. The board was James, Robert, and eventually a social worker they hired. James reviewed every finalist's file. He looked for the specific, telling details: the lunch lady who saved the best fruit for a struggling student's lunchbox, the bus driver who memorized every kid's stop so they felt seen. He wasn't looking for saints. He was looking for fighters. The first grant outside of his own was awarded 8 months later to a woman named Anya, a night shift nurse's aide at a pediatric hospice. She was a widow with twin 4-year-old boys. Her car had died. The grant paid off her debt and bought a reliable used van. James presented it to her in a small ceremony at a community center. He didn't make a speech. He just shook her hand and said, "This is for you and your boys, that's it." She wept. He understood. Sophie thrived. The stability seeped into her like sunlight. She became less anxious, more mischievous. She joined a soccer team. She filled the house with artwork and loud, elaborate games. James was there for all of it. He helped with homework. He chaperoned field trips. He was the dad who showed up, present and unrushed. At bedtime, in her new room under a new set of glow-in-the-dark stars, the stories continued. But now, sometimes, he told a new one. A story about a very smart, very lonely lady who lived in a tower of silence, and how a sound, a simple human sound, found its way through a wall and changed everything. He never used names. Sophie called it the Listen Through the Wall story. She asked for it often. 3 years after Alina's death, James was invited to speak at a small fundraiser for a local literacy nonprofit. He rarely did public things, but this felt connected. He stood at a podium, nervous. He told his story briefly, leaving out the sum of money, focusing on the loneliness and the wall and the sound of a voice. He ended by saying, "We think kindness has to be big, a grand gesture. But sometimes it's just a true thing, sent out into the dark, without an expectation of an echo. My job now is to listen for those echoes, and when I hear one, to send back a lifeline. That's all." After the talk, an elderly man approached him. He had gentle eyes and a careful way of moving. "Mr. Molina, my name is Dr. Evans. I was Alina Vance's personal physician for the last 15 years. James's breath caught. The man continued. "I just wanted you to know something she told me about 2 weeks before she passed. She said the stories you told, they weren't just comfort. They were data." James frowned. "Data?" The doctor nodded. "She was a scientist at heart, you know, her husband's work. She believed in observable results. She told me that in your voice, night after night, she could chart a decline. She heard the fatigue, the stress, the despair mounting. She called it the acoustic signature of someone being worn away. And then, after the loan, she heard the change, not immediate joy, but a slowing of the decline, a stabilization. She said it was the most beautiful data set she'd ever encountered, the measurable sound of a human being coming back from the brink. She said it proved her hypothesis." James was stunned. "What hypothesis?" Dr. Evans smiled softly, that a single point of unexpected, no-strings-attached grace could alter the trajectory of a life. She wasn't just being kind, Mr. Molina. She was running an experiment, and you were the glorious, definitive result. James drove home that night under a clear, star-dusted sky. He thought about data sets and acoustic signatures. He thought about the strategic, brilliant mind that had listened through a wall and diagnosed his suffering with the precision of a master engineer, then engineered its cure. She hadn't just felt sorry for him. She had observed him, and in doing so, she had honored him. He wasn't a charity case. He was a verified result. He walked into his house. Sophie was asleep. He checked on her, smoothing her hair. In the quiet living room, he looked at the framed photo on the mantel. It was the grainy one from Robert's investigator of him and Sophie in the shopping cart. He had asked for a copy. It was the only picture he had of them from the before. He looked at his own face, at the tension around his eyes that he no longer carried. The story had all the elements of a fairy tale, the poor laborer, the dying queen, the secret inheritance. But the truth was messier and more beautiful. It was about physics, a sound wave, a vibration through drywall, a heart resonant enough to receive it, a will, in both senses of the word, strong enough to act. He had started as a man telling stories to his daughter through a wall. He had become a man who built a foundation on the other side of that wall, catching stories of struggle and answering them with grace. The circle was closed, but it was also expanding. He went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. Through the window, he saw the sturdy swing hanging from the tree in his backyard, motionless in the still night. It was waiting. Tomorrow, it would hold his laughing daughter, and in a year, it might hold another child he hadn't yet met. The future was no longer a threat to be survived. It was a house with many rooms, and he was leaving all the lights on. So what is the wall? In the literal sense, it was a hospital partition, a few inches of drywall and insulation. But in the story of James Molina and Alina Vance, the wall was every assumption that separates us. It was the assumption that a billionaire in a private suite and a janitor pushing a mop have nothing in common, that vulnerability is weakness, that kindness must be transactional, that the most profound connections require an introduction. Elena Vance listened through a wall and heard not just a story, but a life unraveling. She used the last of her own life not to build a monument, but to repair a thread. And in doing so, she didn't just save James Molina, she saved herself from the existential silence of dying alone. She proved that the act of giving, when done with clear-eyed purpose, is the most powerful argument against meaninglessness. James, in turn, took that thread and began weaving a net. The Nightlight Foundation isn't a charity in the traditional sense. It is a listening device. It is an institutionalization of the principle that someone somewhere is always speaking their struggle into the dark, and someone else can choose to hear it. He transformed his specific, miraculous rescue into a system for creating more ordinary miracles. The grant isn't a reward for being perfect. It's a lifeline for being human. We live in a world obsessed with visibility, with grand gestures broadcast for applause. But this story happened in the silent hours, in the unmonitored spaces between shifts and shifts of living. It asks a quiet, subversive question. What if the most powerful forces in our lives are the ones no one is filming? The muttered prayer, the hand on a shoulder, the story told to an empty hallway that isn't empty at all. The 37% statistic from the beginning, the number representing the profoundly lonely elderly in hospitals, is not just a data point. It is an ocean of unmet need. But James and Elena's story suggests the counterpoint. Connection isn't always about grand programs or policy shifts. Sometimes it's about frequency, finding the frequency of another human heart and resonating with it. He was sending out a signal of love for his daughter. She was on the exact frequency to receive it as a signal of hope. We all have walls of busyness, of prejudice, of social convention, of simple, exhausting life. This story doesn't demand that we tear them all down. It only suggests that we might press an ear against them every once in a while. And if we hear something true on the other side, a sigh, a struggle, a story, we might have the courage to answer. Because on the other side of someone's wall, there is always a person who might be waiting, without even knowing it, for the sound of a voice telling them that the monster can be defeated, that the little engine could, that someone out there knows they are trying. The final data point in Elena Vance's experiment is still being collected. It's in the stable home of a night shift hospice worker. It's in the college fund of a child who doesn't know her future is already secure. It's in the simple, profound safety of a little girl who knows her daddy will always be there to tell a story. The experiment was a success. The hypothesis was confirmed. Grace, sent without condition, alters trajectories. It proves that the most powerful will in the world isn't always a legal document. Sometimes it's just the will to listen, and then the will to act. Thank you for listening to this story. If you found something in it worth hearing, consider subscribing for more journeys into the unseen forces that shape our world. I'll see you in the next one.